You think it's about her, don't you? Her smile, her scent, her skin. You think the reason your hand moves so quickly at midnight, opening apps, scrolling reels, fantasizing frames is because of lust. But let me ask you something far more honest. What if it was never about her? What if everything you're chasing was only a shadow of something you lost within yourself? Imagine this: you're alone. The room's still. The light from your phone pulsing against your face. It's past midnight. You've done this before. You know the path. Open, swipe, watch, escape. But this time, something feels off. The surge is weaker. The guilt is louder. The silence after is heavier. And somewhere, in the hollow of your chest, there's a voice not loud, but firm, whispering. This isn't desire, this is disconnection, you see. Carl Jung didn't view lust as your enemy. He saw it as your soul waving a red flag, a coded signal from the unconscious, a symptom not of sin, but of starvation. You're not addicted to sex. You're addicted to the illusion of closeness, and worse. You've mistaken the simulation of being wanted for being whole. Lust is not evil. It's just misdirected longing, a scream beneath the surface that says, please, come back to me. But who is me, Jung would tell you? It's not the version you show the world, not the confident mask, not the charming act. That's your persona, the social costume you've learned to wear so the world doesn't see how lost you really are. Underneath that, buried in silence, is the shadow, the boy who was never taught how to hold his own sadness, the man who equated touch with love because he was never taught the difference, the soul that mistook stimulation for connection because the world never gave him time to pause. And every time you reach for lust, you're not reaching forward, you're reaching back to the last moment you felt something real, even if it was twisted, even if it was fleeting, because in that second, you weren't numb, you were alive, and that, Jung believed, is where it begins. But here's the cruel paradox: the more you chase that spark outside, the further you drift from the fire within. It's not that you want more bodies, it's that you've forgotten how to feel your own. You scroll not because you're horny, but because you're hollow. You fantasize not because you're obsessed with pleasure, but because you've abandoned presence. And in the space between image and impulse, something sacred dies: your ability to listen to yourself. Carl Jung believed that when we don't integrate our shadow, it doesn't disappear. It takes the wheel. It drives your choices. It decides who you pursue, what you crave, and what you avoid. You're not just turned on by her body, you're possessed by a longing that has no name. That's why it feels so urgent, so uncontrollable, so empty. Because what you're really chasing is the lost boy inside of you, still begging to be touched, not sexually, but spiritually. Have you ever noticed how it's always late at night when the cravings come? That's not random. That's ritual, because it's in the silence, when the noise of the world fades, that your soul finally gets loud enough to be heard, but instead of listening, you numb. Instead of sitting with the ache, you feed it dopamine. You label it need, when it's actually grief. Grief for the parts of you that were never witnessed, never held, never validated. And so, lust becomes the quicksand. The more you indulge it without awareness, the deeper you sink into yourself, but not in a way that leads to depth. Only distance, Jung said. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And that's why we run. Because to sit in your own stillness means facing everything you've tried to avoid: the shame, the longing, the rage, the loneliness. But here's the breakthrough: those emotions are not your enemies. They are your compass. They are your bridge back to your soul. You've mistaken lust for fire, but it's smoke. The real fire is the courage to feel, to weep without shame, to desire without performing, to touch without escaping. Because until you can hold your own ache with tenderness, you'll keep demanding others to do it for you. That's not love. That's projection. And projection, Jung warned, is the birthplace of addiction. You don't lust after her because she is whole. You lust after her because she reflects the parts of you you no longer recognize. Her softness reminds you of the tenderness you've buried. Her presence evokes the intimacy you've exiled. Her gaze calls to the boy who still waits for someone to say, "I see you. I want you. I'm not leaving." But here's the devastating truth. No one can meet you in those places until you've met yourself there first. That's not a punishment. It's a path. So what do you do when the ache returns not as a whisper, but as a roar, when your hands move on their own? When the screen lights up your emptiness like a spotlight on stage, Jung would say, don't shame it, study it, because this craving is not chaos, it's communication. Your shadow is speaking, not in words, but in urges, not to destroy you, but to reveal you. You see, the soul is subtle. It doesn't demand. It doesn't scream. It waits. And when it has waited too long, it uses whatever language it must to wake you up, even lust, especially lust. Because lust is primal. It bypasses your intellect. It bypasses your pride. It grabs you by the throat and says, "Feel me." But it's not asking you to feel her. It's asking you to feel you, to return to the body you've neglected, the breath you've numbed, the truth you've postponed. And what is that truth that you're tired of pretending, of performing masculinity that doesn't leave room for vulnerability, of chasing pleasure that leaves you more alone than before, of calling it need when it's really mourning for the parts of you never loved in the right way? You didn't learn to feel safe in intimacy. You learned to earn it, with charm, with muscles, with performance, and so your desire became a mask, a performance, a lie. But beneath that lie, your anima waits the feminine within you. She's not weakness, she's not chaos, she's not shame. She is the bridge to your feeling life. And when you repress her, you don't become strong, you become starved, because she holds the keys to your softness, your sorrow, your sensuality, your ability to surrender to something real. And when you deny her, she doesn't disappear. She surfaces in distorted ways, in lust, in obsession, in fantasy, in chasing shadows of love in people who can't even see you. Jung taught that what you reject within, you chase without. That's why the women you pursue feel intoxicating. They are not just women. They are projections of the parts of your soul you abandoned. And when the relationship collapses, it's not just heartbreak, it's spiritual dismemberment, because you weren't just trying to be with her, you were trying to reunite with yourself through her. But no one can carry that weight. No one can be your wholeness for you. So how do you stop the cycle? You come home, not to her, not to your past, to your presence. You sit with the ache without running. You learn to breathe into your chest instead of your groin. You stop asking, "Who turns me on?" and start asking, "Where did I lose touch with my own warmth?" That's where the journey begins. It will feel unbearable at first, like withdrawal, like silence too loud to survive. But that silence is sacred. It's not emptiness, it's invitation, an opening, a doorway back to your own soul, Jung would say. Sit with it, not to conquer it, but to commune with it. Because the goal is not suppression, it's integration. You were never meant to be at war with your desire. You were meant to understand it, to see it not as a flaw but as a flame, one that can burn your house down if untended, or warm your whole life if honored. Lust, when unexamined, will lead you into cycles of guilt and temporary highs, but when explored with compassion, it becomes revelation. It shows you where you've gone numb, where you're hiding from intimacy, where you still believe you are unworthy of being truly known. So many men were taught to dominate, not dissolve, to perform, not process, to pursue, not pause. But you are not just a body. You are not just a mind. You are soul. And your soul is crying for depth. That's why no fantasy satisfies you. That's why no image lingers, because you're not looking for pleasure. You're looking for presence, for someone to say, you don't need to impress me. You just need to be here. And the tragedy is, you've never said that to yourself. Instead, you punish your desire. You mock your sensitivity. You laugh off your loneliness. You turn every moment of ache into a joke or a scroll or a hookup, anything but honesty. Because honesty would reveal the truth you've worked so hard to outrun. You want to be seen, truly naked in soul, not just in skin. And that longing terrifies you, because what if no one ever sees you and stays? But Jung would remind you the one who needs to stay is you, not her, not anyone else. The work isn't to find someone to complete you. The work is to return to the parts of you that you exiled in order to be accepted. The softness, the stillness, the sensitivity, the sacred. When you reclaim those, lust softens. It loses its desperation. It becomes the sacred fire again, the one that fuels art, intimacy, courage, devotion. The soul was never trying to shame you. It was trying to summon you through every craving, through every lonely night, through every moment after climax where you stared at the ceiling and wondered, why do I still feel so empty? That question isn't weakness, it's awakening. And the answer will never be found in her body but in your own. So the next time it rises, that pull in your chest, that ache in your stomach, that invisible hand guiding you toward another meaningless scroll or click or late-night message, pause, not to resist, not to repress, but to listen. Because beneath every impulse is a story, and yours has gone unread for too long. Jung believed that what we fail to make conscious, we are doomed to act out as fate, and you've been living that fate on repeat, chasing phantoms of connection, burning your nervous system with shallow highs, all while your soul whispers, please come back. This isn't just about lust. This is about your relationship to life. Because when you numb desire, you also numb wonder. You stop noticing the sky. You stop hearing music. You stop creating. You stop dreaming. Not because you're broken, but because you've traded aliveness for control. Fantasy offers control. Real love, real intimacy asks you to let go, to be clumsy, to be seen, to risk rejection, and for a man who was never taught to hold his own fragility. That feels like death, but it's not death, it's rebirth. The beginning of individuation, Jung's sacred process of becoming whole, of calling back the exiled parts of yourself, the boy who once danced without shame, the artist who once dared to feel, the man who longs to touch without taking. This is the invitation, not to kill your desire, but to sanctify it, to give it direction, to let it lead you home, not away. You see, most of what you call lust is really a longing to feel safe in your own being. You think you're craving her body, but you're actually craving your own permission to feel, to rest, to receive. And when that permission has never been modeled, never been mirrored, lust becomes a placeholder, a poor substitute for the deep, anchoring presence you never learned to give yourself. This is why no climax fulfills you, because it's not the body you're aching for. It's your own wholeness, your own soul. Jung taught that integration begins when we stop asking, how do I get rid of this, and start asking, what is this here to teach me? So when you feel the urge next time, don't judge it, bow to it, invite it into the room, ask it, what do you need me to feel that I've been avoiding? And listen, because the soul doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in ache. And if you can sit long enough without flinching, without distracting, without numbing, you'll begin to understand its language. You'll begin to see that what you've called lust was always a message. It's a message that says, you have not been touched where it matters. Not by others, not even by yourself. You've touched bodies, but not souls. You've been seen by eyes, not by hearts. You've chased climax after climax, hoping one of them would finally hold you when it's over. But nothing does, because what you're aching for is not a release, it's a return. A return to the parts of you that were never chosen, that were too tender for the world, that learned to hide behind jokes, behind performance, behind porn tabs opened in the dark. Lust was never your downfall. It was your decoy. It distracted you from the aching truth that you haven't felt truly held, not in years, maybe not ever. Jung would say this is the consequence of fragmentation. When the soul splinters into parts, we refuse to meet. We try to compensate by chasing what looks like wholeness in someone else. That's why she seems like salvation. That's why you build fantasies around her. That's why you replay the way she looked at you once, not because she's the answer, but because she represents the mirror you've never dared to hold up to yourself. The anima, the sacred feminine, is not her. It's you. It's your capacity to receive, to feel, to surrender to the rhythm of your own emotional life. And when that's unconscious, when it's buried beneath shame and cultural conditioning, it turns erotic, then chaotic, then empty. You don't need to get rid of lust. You need to rewire your relationship with it. You need to stop treating it like the enemy and start honoring it as the signal. It's not asking for more stimulation, it's asking for more truth. The truth about how numb you've become. The truth about how lonely it feels to never be vulnerable. The truth about how much you long to lay your head down and weep into someone's chest without needing to explain why. But here's the secret. The person you need to do that with first is you. The night you feel most drawn to the illusion is the night your soul is begging for intimacy, with your own shadow, with your own wounds, with your forgotten warmth. So instead of reaching for your phone, reach for your breath. Instead of spiraling into craving, spiral inward into that quiet place beneath the noise, the place you've abandoned in the name of being a man. Because real masculinity isn't the absence of desire, it's the presence of direction, of discipline, of devotion to something deeper than momentary escape. And if you stay there long enough, if you learn to hold yourself in the fire without running, something will break, and then something else will open. You'll cry maybe for the first time in years, you'll shake. You'll feel everything you've buried. And in that collapse, you'll realize this was never about sex. This was about your soul trying to come home. That collapse is sacred. Don't rush it. Don't fix it. Don't judge it. Let it undo you. Let it take away the mask, the armor, the scripts you've been reciting just to survive. Because beneath them is not weakness, it's wisdom. The wisdom of a soul that never stopped calling your name, even when you stopped listening. Jung called this moment the beginning of individuation, when the unconscious starts leaking into consciousness, not to haunt you, but to heal you. And that healing won't look like what you imagined. It won't feel triumphant at first. It will feel raw, humbling, like grief and grace arriving in the same breath. You'll realize that most of your fantasies weren't about her at all. They were about you, begging for reflection. You didn't want her body, you wanted to be chosen. You wanted to be enough without having to perform for it. You wanted to matter, not because of what you offered, but because of who you are when no one is watching. And once you see this, once you name it, the spell begins to break. The loop weakens. The craving loses its power because you finally understand what it was pointing to all along. From this clarity, A new path opens, one where you don't repress desire, but refine it. Where you don't fear the fire, but you contain it like a sacred forge, burning not to destroy you, but to create something stronger, a life with depth, a love with roots, a masculinity that holds space, not just takes it. And when you meet someone again, not in fantasy, but in reality, you won't project your wounds onto her. You won't ask her to carry what you've already learned to hold yourself. You'll show up differently, not as a starving man looking for his next emotional meal, but as a whole being offering presence, not performance, attention, not addiction, clarity, not control. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." You've called it fate when it failed, you said. I guess I'll always be this way. But now you know that was never fate. That was a fragment of you asking to be felt. And now you can feel it. Now you can sit with the part of you that once believed love had to hurt, that desire had to mean sacrifice, that wholeness was something only others deserved. You sit with him, not to change him, but to witness him, because that's what you've always needed. Not another woman, not another rush, but someone finally to sit with your soul and stay. And when you learn to stay, truly stay something inside, you softens, not because the hunger disappears, but because you finally understand it. You no longer flinch when it rises. You no longer shame yourself for wanting to feel alive. Instead, you meet the hunger like an old friend. You say, "I see you, I hear you. Let's go deeper." And for the first time, you don't feed it with fantasy, you feed it with presence. You write, not to distract yourself, but to reveal yourself. You put words to ache that never had language. You draw. You walk barefoot in the grass. You stare at the sky without needing it to give you answers. You sit in silence long enough to realize it's not emptiness, it's space, sacred space. Space where you can breathe again. Space where the shame loosens its grip. Space where the inner boy, the one who learned to earn affection by hiding his pain, finally feels safe enough to speak. Jung would call this the reunion of the opposites, the masculine and the feminine, the ego and the unconscious, the persona and the shadow. And from this reunion, something extraordinary happens, the birth of the true self. Not the self the world trained you to be, not the self you performed to be desired, but the self that was always there, under the rubble of rejection, under the mask of control, under the illusions of lust. That self is not desperate. That self is not fragmented. That self doesn't chase it, radiates, and suddenly you find yourself less interested in the scroll, the swipe, the simulation, not because you've become holy, but because you've become whole. You no longer need the high. Because your nervous system is no longer hijacked by longing. You no longer mistake attention for intimacy. You no longer seek love in places where your soul must shrink to be accepted. And when desire comes, and it will, you welcome it. You bow to it, you ask it what it wants to create, not what it wants to consume. Because now, desire is no longer a thief, it's an artist, a fire you channel into something meaningful, into music, into movement, into making love with presence, not projection, into conversations that feel like prayer, not performance, into a life that no longer chases depth, but lives from it. This is how you reclaim your fire, not by snuffing it out, not by letting it burn you, but by tending to it, feeding it, honoring it as the very energy your soul uses to speak. And when you live from that place, you don't just feel alive. You feel you maybe for the first time. But how do you keep that flame alive when the world keeps trying to snuff it out? When you're surrounded by noise, by screens, by temptations disguised as connection. Jung would say, the world will ask you to conform 1,000 times a day. Your soul will ask only one thing stay true, and that truth is not always loud. It doesn't scream like the algorithm. It doesn't flash like an image meant to hook your dopamine. It whispers. It waits. It watches if you'll return. And so, your real work begins not in isolation, but in integration, how you show up in the ordinary moments, in the way you walk past someone and actually see them, in how you talk to yourself when no one's listening, in the stillness between urges, in the breath you take before you respond. This is your daily practice now, presence, not performance. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest with your cravings, with your chaos, with your capacity for more. Because the old self, the one who chased, who begged, who escaped, he still lives in you. He still gets scared, still reaches out of habit, but now, you don't exile him. You sit beside him. You remind him, we don't have to run anymore. We're allowed to feel, we're allowed to stay, and slowly, that fractured boy becomes part of the man, not a ghost haunting your nights, but a teacher walking beside you, and from that inner unity, the outer world shifts. The way you look at women changes. The way you speak about love changes. You no longer see a body, you see a being. You no longer seek to possess, you seek to understand. You don't fall in love with illusions, you fall in love with truth. Because now, you've learned to fall in love with your own truth, and it shows. You become magnetic not because you've mastered seduction, but because you've stopped needing it. You've stopped leaking energy through unconscious hunger. You've stopped asking others to validate your existence. And in that stillness, your soul becomes louder than any craving ever was. You write with more depth. You speak with more clarity. You move with more purpose. And when desire rises, it no longer drags you away. It leads you deeper in, because now it has a place to land, a heart that's been softened by awareness, a mind that no longer races to escape, a body that doesn't beg to be touched because it has finally been inhabited from the inside out. And so the question is no longer, how do I stop the lust? The real question becomes, how do I start listening to my soul? Because when you begin to truly listen, not just with your ears, but with your body, your breath, your silence, something ancient awakens, a knowing, a memory, a clarity that you were never meant to chase fragments. You were meant to live whole. Carl Jung believed the greatest tragedy of modern man was not that he sins, not that he struggles, but that he no longer knows his own soul. You've tried to fill that void with women, with pleasure, with fantasy, with images that promised warmth but delivered numbness. But your soul doesn't want another climax. It wants to come home. And coming home doesn't mean becoming holy or celibate or pure. It means becoming real. It means facing yourself without flinching. It means asking the hard questions. Why do I run? What am I hiding? What is this ache really asking for? And then choosing again and again to answer with honesty instead of escape, with presence instead of performance, with gentleness instead of judgment. It means realizing you were never meant to live at war with your desire. You were meant to let it guide you not outward, but inward, into art, into service, into connection that doesn't cost you your dignity, into intimacy that begins with your own gaze, your own hands, your own heart learning to say, I am here, I am enough, I will not leave myself again. So before you open that app tonight, pause. Before you reach for the next fix, breathe, not to resist the craving, but to ask it what it really wants. Because inside that craving is a voice, and inside that voice is your map. The map you've avoided, the map you thought someone else would hand you. But it was never out there, it was never in her, it was always in you. And if this has stirred something in you, a recognition, a tear, A silence too loud to ignore, then listen. You've already begun. You're already remembering. So stay with it and tell me in the comments below. What part of yourself have you been chasing in someone else? Because maybe it's time to stop chasing and start returning. Return not as a concept, but as a choice, as a daily practice, as a quiet revolution within your own heart, because the world won't teach you how to do this. The world profits from your disconnection. It rewards your cravings, sells your emptiness back to you in prettier packaging. But your soul is not for sale. It never was. Jung once said that modern man is in search of a soul, and that search often begins in the ruins of our compulsions. So if you feel broken, if you feel ashamed, if you feel exhausted by how many times you've fallen into the same pattern, good. That means your journey is real. That means the fire hasn't gone out. That means you're still alive enough to feel the weight of your own hunger. Don't run from that. Honor it. Because it's not your downfall. It's your doorway. Your soul doesn't want perfection. It wants participation. Your shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be integrated. The anima in you doesn't want to be projected. She wants to be remembered. And you, the man behind all of this, you don't want escape. You want to be found, not by someone else, but by yourself, in your rawness, in your breath, in your weeping, in your waking, and most of all, in your return. Return to your body not as a machine, but as a home. Return to your desire not as a sin, but as a sacred signal. Return to your silence not as a void, but as a voice, because everything you're chasing in lust was never about another person. It was always about you, the part of you still waiting for your own embrace, the boy who just wanted to be held, not consumed, the man who wants to feel not in fragments, but in fullness. So ask yourself, in this moment, right now, what have I mistaken for love? What fantasy have I confused with wholeness? What craving have I tried to silence instead of translate? You don't have to answer all at once. You just have to stay long enough to hear the question fully. That's where it begins. That's where it always begins, not in climax, but in clarity, because clarity is the most radical form of love you can offer yourself. Not motivation, not discipline, not shame dressed up as self-improvement, but a clear-eyed seeing of who you are beneath the ache and who you've always been before the ache began. Carl Jung didn't tell us to conquer the shadow. He told us to walk with it, to learn its name, to speak to it in the language of patience and presence, because your darkness isn't a curse, it's a guide. It's the rejected part of you that became louder and louder until it took the shape of lust, of obsession, of hunger without home. But now, finally, you've turned toward it. And here's the sacred truth no one told you when you stop trying to kill the craving. You start to understand the calling. Lust was never a threat. It was your soul in disguise. It was the fire that could either burn down your life or light the way home. And the moment you choose to stop feeding it blindly and start feeling it fully, you become free. Not instantly, not perfectly, but undeniably. You walk differently. You speak slower. You look others in the eye not to seduce, but to see. You say no more, often not because you're resisting pleasure, but because you've found something deeper, a peace that doesn't vanish after the climax, a power that doesn't depend on how desired you are, a connection that begins with self and overflows into everything else. And if one day someone comes along, someone whose presence feels like gravity, not temptation, you'll know. You won't lose yourself in her eyes, because you've already found yourself in your own. You won't ask her to be your medicine, because you've already healed the wound that used to bleed in the dark. You won't turn her into a mirror for your forgotten softness, because now you live from that softness. You carry it in your voice, your art, your silence. So this is the part where you choose. Not what app to open, not who to text next, but what man you will now become. Will you keep feeding the shadow, calling it love, drowning in the endless ache of not enough? Or will you, finally, say enough? I choose to stay, I choose to feel, I choose to return. So stay, stay through the trembling, stay through the silence that once terrified you. Stay with the part of you that doesn't want to stay, because that's where the alchemy begins. Not when you conquer lust, but when you hold space for the soul that was hiding behind it. When you choose to see your desire not as a threat, but as a compass. It points you back to your truth, back to your softness, back to the pieces of you that never needed to be fixed, only felt. And as you walk this path, not just tonight, but again tomorrow, and the day after that, you begin to see differently. The same world, but through new eyes, the same impulses, but with new understanding. You stop asking how to escape and start asking how to embody. You stop running from your ache and start moving with it, dancing with it, creating with it, letting it break you open instead of breaking you down. And this is the fire Jung wanted you to reclaim. The sacred fire, the kind that forges, not destroys, the kind that purifies, not punishes, the kind that says, I am no longer ashamed of what I feel, because now you've learned how to feel without losing yourself, to want without worship, to burn without being consumed. That is real power. That is sacred masculinity. That is what the world never taught you, but your soul always knew. So the next time it rises, the scroll, the urge, the image, the impulse, pause. And in that pause, remember this: you don't want her. You want you. You don't want release. You want reunion. You don't want performance. You want presence. And no one can give you that but you. So sit, breathe, listen, and then, when you're ready, rise. Not with shame, not with hunger, but with a knowing that you are no longer running. You are returning. Now tell me, in the comments below, what part of yourself have you been craving through others? Because maybe the love you've been seeking was your own reflection all along. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and if it stirred something in you, drop a super thanks to keep this kind of work alive. And more than anything, honor the fire within you. It never left. It just needed your permission to burn clean again. You're not broken. You're becoming